Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today is a part 2 in a how to study series that I've been doing for junior high, high school, and even some college courses this information can be helpful for. If you missed my video from last week, I highly suggest you go back and take a look at that one, probably before watching this one because it will make more sense to you. Last week we talked about how to take notes, how to organize your notes, how to use color coding and things like that, and I'll kind of show you a sample of them in the beginning of this video, but for more details you'll want to just go back and watch that one, and I will link it below for you. Today we're going to talk about kind of part 2 of that, what to do with those notes, and how to create effective study tools using your notes to help you so that you can be successful when it comes time to study and take exams. And then my next video will actually get into more study tips, test taking tips, and things like that. So today we're going to talk about creating one of my favorite tools for studying, and that is flashcards. I'm going to show you how to create them, the best methods for doing that, how to use them, and just how to make it so it's actually really easy for your brain to remember, just an effective way to study your notes and to learn the information that you're being required to learn from your class. So let's take a closer look. I'll show you, there's several different ways to do this. I'm just going to show you a couple of the ways that we like to do it here, and hopefully that will at least give you a jumping point to get started on your own. So let's take a little bit closer look at our flashcards and how we organize them.
Alright, so if you've watched my taking notes video on how to take effective study notes, you'll know that we kind of showed you an outline of writing a title of either the lecture or maybe the chapter or chapter heading or whatever at the top, and then you're going to write just important people, places, dates, events, and vocabulary down on this side, and then this side will be filled with a certain amount of information on those events, and then you may or may not choose to do some sort of a summary of the chapter or lecture down here on the bottom, maybe questions that you might have and that kind of thing. So this is kind of going to be the overall outline of what your notes will look like. Now, using this outline, you might come up with something that looks something like this. We've got the header of our chapter. We're learning about shellfish and sea stars. We've got 2 main categories, mollusks and crustaceans, and then here's just some bullet points on this side about those. Here's a couple types of mollusks, univalves and bivalves, and here's some information for both of those. Now down here I drew a little picture of a pie crust because that helps me remember that crustaceans have a crust-like shell. So whatever you need to do to kind of make your notes work and make sense for you, and this is just done on regular copy paper. I also have the same exact kind of notes just created on plain copy paper. I'm sorry, this was regular lined paper from like a spiral. This is just plain copy paper, and I simply drew a line down the middle, and then I'm just kind of breaking it up into more visually pleasing sections, so my eye can kind of focus on smaller sections at a time, which really can help you when you're trying to learn and memorize material. The other thing that this is useful for is creating flashcards. Now, not everybody loves flashcards, however, I do like to think of them as a very useful study tool. So I have my kids do flashcards, and they're going to do that based on some of the notes they've taken. So obviously it's important for you to take good notes. We also talked a little bit about using mnemonic devices to help you remember things like algebraic equations. This is the order of operations. And so, you know, common one is please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. I was having a hard time remembering that one. But anyways, as you know, you can just take the beginning letters and create some kind of a poem or a little funny sentence that makes sense to you that will help you remember things. Also, color coding is a great way to remember things. So my daughter has this little chart here, and she knows that anytime she's reading and she sees a person that's important to highlight it in green, and that just kind of helps her when she's going back through and studying to, if she needs to look at the people, she can just look through the green in her notes or in her textbook or the pink or blue or whatever. So this just kind of all helps give your eyes and your mind a visual association with words. You can draw pictures. Pictures and words together are an extremely and effective study tool when needing to learn information. So all of these things put together are just really helpful. And then of course, We also talked a little bit about making lettering, and I kind of show you how to do some of these fancy letterings. I'm not the best at penmanship, so there's a lot of other people out there who have way more amazing options for lettering and font, but this is a good way to separate out notes, just to highlight a word or highlight a section, and none of them are very difficult, but you can go back and watch my note-taking video if you kind of want to see how to do those, or just search online. There's tons and tons of tutorials on creating simple and easy lettering. All right, so those were some of my note-taking tips, and I just want to go through and show you how you can then take your notes and create study guides or flashcards with them. Now, I will talk to you a little bit more in detail about studying your flashcards in another video, studying your notes, what to study, how to organize it, and all of that, but we'll do that in a different video. Today I'm just going to talk to you about creating flashcards, because you're going to want to make sure that you create them in a way that's workable for you. Now, everybody's going to be a little bit different. My daughter likes to draw pictures to go with her flashcards, but essentially what you're going to be doing is taking the information that you wrote down and just transferring them onto flashcards that you can then use to study. And like I said, I'll show you what all these different colors mean in next week's video. But you can use small ones like that. You can use these kind of larger ones. My son prefers the larger ones. I tend to like to stick to white flashcards, and you can kind of see the size difference here. It really doesn't matter unless you have more information to get on here, or you want to draw bigger or better pictures or whatever. I don't think the size matters. I do like to stick to white cards though, because you can help color code them, and you can kind of stick to your little color coding chart over here, and it just can kind of make things a little bit more organized and manageable. All right, so now it's time to take the notes that I've taken and translate them onto flashcards. Now, this might kind of seem silly, but if you'll stick with me and give me a shot at doing this, I think you'll see in the next video how these are going to be really helpful to your studying techniques. Now, my first tip is to create your own flashcards. Now, there are software programs or apps out there like Anki. It's a great program. You can create electronic flashcards. Those are great because they're extremely portable. You tend to have your electronic device on you most of the time, and so if you're sitting in traffic or carpooling or anything like that, it's really easy to kind of study those cards whenever you have a few minutes. I still like to create this type of card though, because the more work that you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. If you're writing down the information yourself instead of borrowing a set of flashcards from a friend, for example, you're not really going to get that much out of it. It might be tempting to use somebody else's, but they won't be as nearly as effective as creating your own. So let's see how we can take this information, and if you've watched my video, you should know how I got all of this information, and hopefully you've taken clear and concise notes. Hopefully they're not super long and involved, and it will be really easy to take this information and then translate it onto a little card. Now, it doesn't matter what size you use. You can use these larger cards. My son likes these big ones. My daughter has these tiny ones. It really doesn't matter. I do suggest using white cards because that way you can kind of use colors, draw pictures. If you're using colored cards, it can be a little bit more difficult just to deal with overall. So that's just my suggestion, but again, do whatever works for you. So my first tip is to put one thing on the back of each card. Now, if you write down mollusks on the front of this card and then all 4 of these bullet points on the back, when you're studying this card, you may remember these first 3, but you might not actually remember this last one until you turn over the card and then you see it and then you say, oh, that's right, I forgot about the exoskeleton. Now, that's doing 2 things. One, your brain has recognized this information because it's written it down before, it's seen it or read it before. However, it has not able to recall that information when you're in, like, say, a test-taking situation. So by writing one thing on the back of each card, you can quiz yourself individually on each thing, and therefore you'll be much more likely to be able to remember all of them. If you've memorized all of these cards, then you can kind of put those away and keep this one out until you have this one memorized. Otherwise, you're going to be continuing to remember these and continuing to forget this one, and then this one might be the one that's actually on the test. So in order to do that, I suggest putting one thing on each card. So that means you're going to have more flashcards, which is fine. It's better to work that way. More is better than less. And trying to memorize one thing is easier than trying to memorize several things. So tip 1, one thing on a card. Tip 2, make your cards easy to read, all right? You don't want a whole big long question sentence over here. That's too much information for your brain to see and process. If I want to know what the mollusk's hard shell is called or what the exoskeleton is, that's all I want on this card. So at the top, I'm going to write mollusk, and I might use my tall, skinny letters, and then I am wanting to know what their hard shell is called. So I'm just going to write hard shell question mark. Easy, right? On the back of that, then I can write the answer, which is exoskeleton. All right, so far this card is looking pretty good. It's pretty simple, pretty easy to read, nothing too complicated. My third tip is to mix pictures with words, all right? So studies have shown that if you can mix pictures with words, your brain will create a stronger association with those things. All right, so mollusk is a type of mollusk we know is a clamshell. And so I might actually, I'm a horrible, artist here, but here we go. This is kind of a clamshell to me. All right, so I'm going to add a little clamshell here so that I remember what a mollusk is, because it's possible that I will forget what a mollusk is. This is going to help me remember that, oh yeah, that's right, it's a clam, and they've got a hard shell, which I know now that that kind of gives me a clue as to, oh, hey, and they're bivalves. I actually can remember that as well. All right, so I've got a hard shell, what's it called? And then I can flip it over and memorize exoskeleton. I might even draw a little picture of a skeleton somewhere back here just to kind of help me memorize that as well. All right, so that's a relatively effective flashcard. The only other thing that I would probably add to this flashcard is a exoskeleton. This was in my notes green, and it was a vocabulary word, and I've decided to highlight my vocabulary words in green. So I might actually either just write a green stripe down the side of this card. I might even just put like a green dot up here or something, just so that I know if I'm studying and say, oh, I want to study all my vocab words right now, it'll be really easy to pull out all of my cards if they've all got like a green dot on them, say. All right, so you can kind of color code them like that if you like. The other thing that I like to do, and this certainly isn't a must, but I know that this card came from section 5.4, Shellfish and Sea Stars. I might actually just down here in tiny writing on the bottom write chapter 5, so that if I need to say study for all of my chapter 5 items, then I can quickly pull out the chapter 5 flashcards. Now, the reason that that is kind of helpful for me is because let's say we're towards the end of the year and we're in chapter 15 and I'm trying to study my flashcards and I've got a test on say 13, 14, and 15, I don't necessarily want to pull out chapters 1 through 12 and go through all those flashcards when what I really need to be working on are just the 3 that I'm being tested on. So this can just kind of help. It's not a necessity. You can also keep them like bundled by chapter as you go through or whatever works best for you. But this is just kind of a nice little thing to help keep them organized once you've got them made, and then they're starting to get mixed in with all of your different chapters and that kind of thing. So at this point, I think that we've got a fairly workable flashcard. It's easy to read. There's not a whole lot of information. We've got a picture, we've got a color, and we're ready to go. Now this might seem kind of like a waste of time because you've already written down here, but if you'll just stick with me and give me a chance, in the next video I'm going to show you how to use these to study your notes and to help you to learn and memorize information. Flashcards are a lot more portable. You can take these on walks outside and just sit there and kind of quiz yourself as you're taking a walk. Studies have also shown that doing something kinetic like getting exercise and fresh air while you're studying can also really help with your retention rate. So that's a lot easier than taking maybe say an entire binder or spiral full of notes and trying to read through these when you can just quickly quiz yourself while you're walking down the street. All right, so let's kind of review what we've done. Number 1, make your own flashcards. The more work you put into them, the more work that you will get out of them. Number 2, keep it simple. Keep your words to a minimum. Make them clear and easy to read. Don't get, super fancy with long sentences or anything like that. Do the bare amount of, minimum amount of work that you can do with the maximum amount of results. All right. You might also this is like a cardstock. You might also consider using a little bit thicker paper just so that, your ink doesn't bleed through. I used Sharpie on this, and you can kind of see it, so you could technically cheat slightly. You could also use a lighter pen. I just did that so you can see it a little bit better on camera. Okay, tip number 3. Do not make these at the last minute. How I have my students do them is that the day that they are doing this in class and they're reading and writing down their notes, it's part of their daily assignment. That night they each have some study time, like homework time. And during that homework time, they will take their notes and transfer them into flashcards, and then they can store those flashcards. Now, it's a lot easier if you've read, one section or whatever per day to make the flashcards that correspond with it. It's still fresh in your mind. You still have ideas of what images to use and that kind of thing. But it's really hard if, say, you've read several chapters or several sections and then you sit down the night before your test and try and come up with a bazillion different flashcards. First of all, it takes too much time. Second of all, you're not actually studying them. You're spending time creating them, and so they're not really going to be effective or helpful. So I would make your flashcards early on. If you can, do it that night that you've taken your class. Make your flashcards that night after you've taken your notes or as you're taking them your notes, but just make them early on. All right, we already mentioned to keep them simple. Also, we already mentioned, I believe, to use pictures in association with words. All right, pictures and words together will help your brain remember more of what you've done. All right, so those are my tips on creating useful flashcards off of your notes that you've taken. And in the next video, I will show you effective ways to study for these and just improve your grades, improve your test scores, and also reduce your test anxiety, because the more prepared that you are for a test, the less anxious you'll be about it, and the test taking just procedure in general will be a lot easier for you. All right, so I think we've done a really good job here creating a successful flashcard. I would highly encourage you to go home, take whatever notes that you've taken for the day and create your own set of flashcards using them. All you really need are some paper, and worst case, if you don't have paper, you can chop up some copy paper. As long as you use pencil, you won't be able to see through it. Get yourself maybe some highlighters to help make them a little bit more interesting, and just get started on creating your flashcards, and then I will meet you back here for the next video to show you how to use these to study for your tests.
Alright guys, so those are my tips on creating effective study tools, flashcards, using them in your daily school, whether you're homeschooled or going to a traditional school, or whether you're in a college class or taking an online class. All of these methods are really helpful regardless of how you are obtaining your education. So I hope you found these tips helpful. Next week we'll talk about how to study, some studying strategies and tips and tricks that I have that can hopefully help you out in that area as well, which will hopefully give you better test results and improve your grades overall. So if you have any tips to share on how you like to make study tools and take notes and things like that, please make sure to leave a comment below so that others can learn from your experiences as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll put all of my information below if you need to contact me or if you have any questions, and I will see you next time.